think what I've loved about academic writing is that it has a lot to do with writing dialogue. It's all about, for me anyway, it's about paring things down, about making sometimes complex ideas as simple as possible so that anyone can read them. That's always been my goal.
Hello and welcome to Collected, the podcast about writing from the Royal Literary Fund. I'm Doug Johnstone, a novelist and an RLF fellow. This podcast aims to give a more rounded picture of the writing life than we often see in the media. We'll be dipping into the RLF archives as we go, listening to short pieces by other Royal Literary Fund writers as launching off points for our conversations. I'm delighted to have Marianne Colbran with me today in the studio. Hi, Marianne.
Hi, Doug.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Marianne has got an incredible CV, which I'm dying to talk to her about. She's a non-fiction writer, screenwriter and playwright. That's the basics. She began writing in her teens for Jackie magazine. Wow. She went on to study acting, then wrote and performed her own plays before moving to a career in television as a staff writer for both The Bill and Brookside, amongst other shows. She also has a parallel career as an academic, like you do, and has an MSc and PhD in criminology from the London School of Economics. She currently has tenure as an honorary fellow in criminology at the University of Edinburgh Law School. Influenced by her time at The Bill, Marianne's academic work focuses on how crime and the police are portrayed through the news and media, and has published 2 books on the subject. And she's also currently the RLF Fellow at St Mary's University in London. So welcome to Collected, Marianne.
Thank you.
One of the things that we do on this podcast in Collected is talk about something that's kind of topical. And when this goes out, it's going to be around about the time of Agatha Christie's birthday, which is a really obvious excuse to talk about crime fiction, because I think your experience is really interesting in this regard. So I was wondering, because you write about real life crime in your academic work. So what is your relationship to crime fiction like? Because you've also obviously written it in terms of television stuff as well.
Shamefully, can I admit that I wasn't somebody who grew up being really fascinated by crime or reading crime fiction or anything like that at all. Really, it all started basically when I got my first telly job, and my very first telly job was The Bill. Mm-hmm. And that was in 1990. And in those days, The Bill, the writers were expected to do a lot of research before they even wrote for the show. And you were also expected to basically spend time with the police. So I spent loads and loads of time in the back of Panda cars, being on the beat for shifts, 2 till 10, 10 till 6, middle of the night. I also spent time in domestic violence units. I spent time, because I was one of the youngest members of the team at that point, at Hendon, the training school for police officers. Mm-hmm. And it was then that I kind of got hooked on crime and, I suppose, crime drama. Yeah. So that's what I've always written, crime drama. And my academic work is about crime drama and crime news. But to say, shamefully, I don't actually read crime fiction.
Hey, I'm a crime writer. What are you talking about?
I know, shame on me.
You don't have to read this stuff.
Yeah, I think people are always a bit shocked. Because I remember doing a talk in France about my work, and one of the professors in the front row was saying, so what do you think of this? I think about Agatha Christie.
Okay.
I've never read any Agatha Christie. And she's like, and you say you're an academic. And she self-threatened. It's like, yeah, sorry, I'm a bit of a failure in that respect.
Well, listen, I'm a crime fiction writer, and I've never read Agatha Christie either. Okay. Our producer is looking shocked. I know. Can we cut that bit?
Yeah.
I'll be thrown out of the union. So I think that's really interesting. Your experience of at The Bill is fascinating, because that strikes me as quite unusual, surely, that you were expected to do all that stuff kind of off your own bat, to go and ride along, with police. Because I know some crime fiction writers who do that. But it strikes me that, the schedules are awash with crime, with police dramas now on the television. And it strikes me that they don't all go through that rigorous... I'm trying to be polite about it, but they don't seem like they've got a lot of veracity to them, some of them. I wonder how you feel about that. Does that kind of thing still happen? It must do in some shows, but there's quite a variation, isn't there?
Whoa, that's a huge question.
Yeah, sorry.
No. You're going to get me on my sort of specialist topic, and I'm going to rant at you about that. So The bill was quite unusual at that time for getting writers to go out and do research. And I think that was its USP, that, we write about the sort of crimes that would happen in a local police station. So we didn't write about murder or violence or any violent sexual crimes. It was all this sort of little nitty-gritty. I think the executive producer called it the small change of policing.
Okay.
But it was a practice that used to go on in the 50s and 60s. So Dixon of Dock Green, if we go back all that way, when I was doing my research for my PhD, apparently the writers actually took all their stories from real-life police files.
Wow, okay.
And the same with Z cars that followed on in the 60s. And they only stopped doing it when Z cars became so popular that the writers just didn't have the time and the luxury to go out and do that sort of work, because it's really, really time-consuming.
Yeah.
And how that worked on the bill when I was there in the 90s, and obviously it'd been going for a while before that, was that each episode was very much a one-off. So as a writer, even as a staff writer, which I was, you pitched your idea to your script editor, who then gave it to the executive producer. They'd say yes or no. And then you'd have 6 weeks, which, looking back, was a huge luxury, to write a half-hour script.
I'm absolutely goggle-eyed at this. This is incredible.
I know. So you had this half-hour. So basically, the bill had their own contacts within the Met. So quite often, if you were doing a story, I don't know, on domestic violence, they say, OK, we know so-and-so, go and spend a week or so shadowing them. And then also, you were meant to develop your own contacts, so I had my own contacts as well. So it was just fantastic. And then when I got to LSE to do my master's, first of all, that's how the PhD came about. I was really lucky to be taught by sort of one of the foremost criminologists, Robert Reiner, who is a total crime, TV and film buff. And he was just fascinating. He was saying, a lot of academics haven't spent the time in the field that you did as a scriptwriter on the bill.
Yeah, of course.
I think, though, there is a bit of a move back towards shows being based on research. I don't know if you ever saw Broadchurch.
Yes, yeah.
That was definitely, because I talked to Chris Chibnall, the creator, and that was definitely based on a lot of solid research. And in series 3, which is all about the rape of a local woman, he was telling me that he worked with a lot of organisations and police to make sure that every detail was very accurate. And same with Sally Wainwright and Happy Valley.
Yeah.
All her shows are very much based on research.
So one of the things we do here on the podcast, we're looking at little snippets of archive material from the Royal Literary Fund, previous recordings. They've been going for over 10 years. So we're going to hear the first of those now. And this is writer Simon Robson talking about rejection.
Rejection as a writer is telling a joke that no one laughs at. It is going on a trip and realizing halfway through that no one wants to be there. It is forgetting someone is a vegetarian as you serve them steak. It is all your fault. It must be. Rejection is a cross, not a tick. It is guessing wrong. It is a failure of timing or taste. It is to offer up the inappropriate as if it were wanted. It suggests you have too much education or not enough. It suggests you live in an ivory tower or have lowered yourself too much in an eagerness to please. Rejection is to know you have got it wrong, either recently or possibly a long way back. That to think what you have written is acceptable is to be in the grip of a fetish which absolutely no one else shares and for which forgiveness, let alone understanding, is unlikely. Rejection is to be told that you have left the door open and something or someone you love has escaped through negligence or selfishness or distraction. Rejection is what used to happen to other people, and which we assumed was the product of their pride, their otherworldliness, their arrogance, or misplaced confidence in their abilities. It was the necessary corrective to narcissism and esoteric absurdity. Rejection is that which we now rebrand as education, as character building, and even romantically thrilling, even as necessary to prove our uniqueness and inscrutable superiority. Requited love is sweet, but unrequited yields the best poetry. Rejection is impotence, stage fright. It is a stammer. It is not finding the right words on meeting someone who has been bereaved. Rejection is to receive pain in direct proportion to the love with which we created our characters. It is an exact mirror image. We are beaten by our own stick. It is our bed, and we must lie on it. Above all, rejection is a cliché. And rejection sullies success. Success and failure are not opposite sides of the same coin. One does not cancel out the other. There is no acceptance so profound in its embrace as rejection is in its refusal. The game is rigged. But we will take the cold shower. We will man up. We will accept the rules of the game, for it would be disingenuous to complain at this late stage, no? We will descend into ourselves and find the incontrovertible evidence of our good heart and our talent, and he who writes our story will one day marvel that we strove against the odds for validation. I have only to be less proud or more proud. I have only to write in a different genre, a different font. I have only to leave my ivory tower or ascend to a higher floor. All will be changed. I will take it more and less seriously. I will recalibrate. I will ignore. The only real artist is a confident one. After all, no one asked you to write. Nobody has the right to speak and not respect the reply. Nobody. Least of all, you.
Wow, I think we all need to go in. I'm in the recovery position listening to that just now. It was great. I loved listening to Simon's voice, but it was a bit of a. We all get beaten by our own stick. That doesn't sound good. It was tough. That was tough, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It made me think about rejection. So this is not a psychiatrist's couch, but Marianne, how do you? I mean, rejection's inbuilt to the writing life, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, how do you cope with it? What's your relationship to it?
Oh, you said this is not the psychiatrist's couch. So I'm probably going to kick myself for saying the next thing. But when I was listening to that, I kept thinking, I think I sort of, because of the background I came from and the family I came from, I sort of was more gobsmacked, and I still am every time something goes right. So it's more like, what does this say about me? I don't know. But it's more like expecting things to go wrong. So when you get something that goes right, it's like, whoa, I haven't been found out. And that's probably what my career's felt like. Like, oh, okay, that's all right. Let me put another step in front. Oh, that's okay. And it's more, yeah. Makes me sound a right miserable bitch, doesn't it?
Well, it's like the Smiths line, a pessimist is never disappointed, right? So
Yeah, obviously, yeah. And I grew up loving Morrissey, so what do you expect? Lapsed Catholic, loves the Smiths, yeah.
But, I mean, I'm interested in the different kinds of rejection. I mean, it's because you started off writing for Jackie, but you were very quickly a playwright, basically, and performing as well. And if there's one career that's more, it's got more inbuilt rejection than writing, it's probably acting. Right,
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, was it all plain sailing? Were you just every time you wrote a play, you just got to perform it? I assume not. So how did you deal with? I mean, that's quite a big ego, like crush, isn't it? I think.
Oh gosh, so it was a really gradual process. It's one of those things that you put down, and it looks like success, 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 and it doesn't sort of take into account all the gaps in between. So I came from a really quite poor working class family, and there were no books in my house. No one went to university, nothing like that. So I always felt a bit like cuckoo in the nest. But I grew up watching television, and I was a sickly kid. I had asthma, so I used to write. And because I grew up watching television, I wrote scripts. So that was the natural thing that I did. And I was quite lucky along the way. Like, I wrote before I left school for Jackie. And then I wrote, bizarrely, there was a magazine doesn't exist anymore called Harper's and Queen.
Oh, yeah.
And they had this special teenage issue. And God knows why I thought I could do it. But I wrote to them and I said, I will be your sex expert. And my dad was furious because the Evening Standard had me in there as sexy schoolgirl, Marianne Colbran. And my dad was like, oh, I won't even say, because you'll have to just edit out everything my dad said about it.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
You know. And so then when I went to university, it was like, I couldn't understand why I was always having all these blokes coming on to me, because it was just like sexy schoolgirl, the sex expert. And then what really happened was I sort of did lots of acting and directing at university. And then I was out of work, found it really hard to get a job after university. And then I sort of landed on my feet by getting a job at the RSC as a researcher there to this fantastic guy called John Barton, who gave me, basically, he used to tell me at the beginning of the week, these were the things you need to do. And I used to work like 12 hours on a Monday and a Tuesday, and the rest of the week I'd have off to write.
Okay.
And then I wrote a play about this disastrous relationship I'd had at university. And then that was kind of, I took some time off work and I typed it, and I remember there was this award called the George Devine Award, and I sort of dropped it in the letterbox of whatever house it was that was the entry point for this. And then, to my amazement, a few weeks later, I got a call from the National Theatre, and they said they wanted to put on a production. And then I thought, oh, wow, it's made. And then, of course it isn't. So then I went to drama school because I had this mad idea, which all sounds really arrogant, but I think it was just total ignorance, because I didn't know anybody else who acted or wrote or anything like that. And I thought, well, I really want to be a writer, and maybe if I was an actor, it might help with the writing.
Yeah.
But what happened after that was I thought, well, you had to sort of get gigs to get an equity card. So I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll write myself a show, because I know what I can just about do as an actress, just about. I'm quite good at crying on stage, that's about it. That's my only thing I could do. So I'll do something like that. And then if I tour around, I'll get an equity card. I then had this idea that maybe I could take it to the Edinburgh Festival. So it's really kind of crazy. I moved back in with my mum and dad, who were not very happy at all. And I had all these jobs, like cleaning jobs and all the rest of it, to try and raise money to take this show to the Edinburgh Festival. And the set was half the stuff from my boyfriend's flat. And my boyfriend wrote the music. My two best friends did the sound and the lighting. And that was kind of how it all started. So it was all really haphazard, and I didn't really have a clue what I was doing. It was all just blind faith, really.
So how did you go from that to writing for the Bill? That seems extraordinary. And also the environment at the Bill, was it really competitive in the writer's room, or was it supportive? Because you get the idea now that writers' rooms, especially, say, comedies, people are kind of undercutting each other and trying to get their own things in there. What was the feeling like? Was it a nice working environment?
So there were two phases to the Bill. The first phase, when I worked there in the 1990s, there were no writers' rooms. You didn't meet the other writers. The only time you ever met the other writers was at the Christmas party, where everyone went totally berserk, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
But in the second phase of the Bill, again, we didn't really have a writers' room as such. We had a writers' get-together every 3 months, in which we all sort of plotted the storylines for the next year. The only experience I really had of a writer's room was on Brookside, and that was very much, every week we were there, the team, coming up with the ideas. And I don't know so much as it wasn't supportive, as I found it quite daunting.
Yeah.
It was a very male group. There were a lot of writers who'd been there for a very long time. It could get quite argumentative, and I think I felt quite intimidated. Also, my brain doesn't work as fast as that lot. I used to sort of go, okay, I've got an idea. Do I dare put my hand up and stop the room? it isn't really that good. Oh God, Phil Redmond's over there. Is he going to think I'm a right wazzer? And I used to just sit there pretty much petrified. And in the end, I used to sort of go to the executive producer, say, I've got this idea, here you go. And I'd give him a bit of paper.
Okay.
So I think I wasn't really cut out for that kind of writer's room. I wasn't very good at it at all.
Okay, how does the world of academia compare? It's got this kind of reputation of being sort of quietly cutthroat, maybe, and people, or do you find it really supportive in terms of your work being rejected out of hand by other people?
Oh, that's a very big question. No,
if you could just summarise that in 2 minutes.
I can. I think, like most things, it really depends on the culture of the organisation. So what happened, a whole load of reasons why I sort of went into academia from working in television. It was part to do with health. I developed a pretty serious autoimmune condition, which I still have, but it was pretty bad then. I spent a year literally not being able to get out of bed. And so academia really wasn't at that point, there's a kind of a sort of flavour to this, it really wasn't a conscious decision. It was me thinking, I'm not well enough to do all the travelling that I was having to do with working telly and going up and down to Liverpool and all the rest of it. So I was trying to think, what could I do next? And I had this idea that maybe criminology would help me be a crime writer. So it was just going to be something that I did on the side.
Yeah.
And then I got a place at LSE to do criminology. And it was really not what I expected. Everybody still thinks it's to do with forensics and whatever, but it isn't. And I found it a hugely supportive and really quite nurturing environment. I think I landed on my feet with the people I was working with. So at LSE at that time, it was very much, I think in the 60s, criminology had been the discipline. And all the stars, the academic stars, like people like Stan Cohen, were there. And they were still there when I came along in the mid-2000s. Mm-hmm. And what was also interesting for me working in academia was that, so a lot of academics said to me, how have you left all that glamour of television behind to do this? And I'll tell you what it was. It felt like it was miles more, which is a really bizarre thing to say. And I don't think it's true of any other PhD It was weirdly creative and really exciting.
Okay.
My PhD was basically about how do you make shows like The Bill? And why do crime shows like The Bill never tell the truth about the police?
Yeah.
So I basically spent lots of time sitting in on all these production meetings that I would never have seen as a writer and interviewing lots of people and then being very aware when you're going through all the transcripts, are they spinning me a line here? Mm-hmm. How do I check this out? And then the second book was even more so because that was looking at police and media relations post-Leveson, and that developed into something else. And that was all quite exciting because I was getting to speak to lots of journalists, some of whom had been arrested in the sort of the Leveson inquiry. Yeah. I was talking to lots of police officers and people coming to drive out and say, right, I've got to meet you in Windsor. I've got to sit with my back to the window because I've got to be very careful no one sees me with you. So it really felt like, it felt quite creative. It was interviewing people, working out what the story was and telling it. And that's what all my books have been about. So it didn't feel like such a far step from being a scriptwriter to being an academic at all.
Well, that kind of brought us on. You've already answered some of the next thing I was going to talk about, that experience of what you learned writing, for screen. And it sounds you've already talked about the sort of journalism aspect and trying to keep it as true as possible. But also, is there stuff about, I'm interested in your academic writing, do you use stuff like 3-act structure?
Yes.
And you must be thinking about the voice you're writing in as well. So could you tell me a little bit about those transferable skills? Yeah,
definitely. And it's something that I talk about because I'm an RLF fellow with students who come and see me. And it's been actually, I hope, quite helpful, particularly to the students who are just embarking on PhDs, because I tell them it's just like writing a script, and they get kind of quite enthusiastic about it. So I say, okay, so your research question is like your 1-minute pitch. What is this about? Why should you spend 5 years of your life or whatever? Why should I want to read this? And you really push them till they say something really meaningful and really exciting. So it's not that far off from being a scriptwriter.
Yeah.
And the same with the 3-act structure. And I'm always saying, look, what you want to do is write as clearly as possible. None of this academic nonsense. Do not use long words. Use, one word instead of 50 million words that no one else can understand. And you're telling a story. You're telling a very clear story.
But what about the voice? I mean, you've written academic books, and I think one of the things that RLF does so well is it helps students they have this crazy idea about just exactly what you were talking about what sounds academic.
Yes.
And it strikes me that you must have got a huge amount of experience of being clinical at self-editing when you were a journalist, a playwright, and then writing for screen. Because, I mean, the bill was half an hour, minus adverts, right? So you had to be absolutely brutal with getting to the point, didn't you?
Yeah, and in a weird way, it was a bit of a jump, first of all, going from writing scripts and writing dialogue to writing prose. And actually, one of my profs had a look at one of my first efforts, and he said, I do not understand how you could have made a living from writing. This is absolutely execrable.
Oh, we finished talking about rejection, Marianne. Yeah, sorry, on you go.
So, interestingly, a friend of my husband's, who is an academic, said something to me before I started about how you have to earn the right to be able to not write in an academic style. And I thought that was a bit odd. And the discipline I was in sociology, I think the people that I admired the most wrote really very clear, compelling books. Like one of my academic supervisors wrote this fantastic thing called Villains, which was, going back to the whole investigative journalism thing. It was all about her time spent in the East End and interviewing what I suppose you would have called 60s, 70s gangsters, and how they got into that, and what were their sort of codes of practice, and what was their ethos for doing this. So I've always really tried to aim for not an academic style, but something that's very clean and very conversational. And again, I think what I've loved about academic writing is that it has a lot to do with writing dialogue. It's all about, for me anyway, it's about paring things down, about making sometimes complex ideas as simple as possible so that anyone can read them. That's always been my goal.
Okay, it's time for our second little snippet from the archives. So this time we're going to listen to Rupa Faruqi talking about the day she moved into her new house in Tooting in London.
Looking back, I think that we'd based our decision on the seductive size of the house itself, the period details, and the practical fact that it was just 20 or so minutes on the tube to our jobs in Green Park. I knew nothing, really, about the area. I think I simply assumed that it wouldn't be so different from Bethnal Green or Wandsworth, or anywhere else outside Zone 1. But on the day that we arrived, the road that carried on past the tube station was blocked. There was a police cordon. The moving van, which had travelled from East London to South with all our worldly possessions, was stuck, with hundreds of honking cars. It turned out that there'd been a stabbing somewhere along that road, and so we just couldn't get to our new house. The keys we'd collected hung uselessly in our hands. Does this sort of thing happen often? I asked the estate agent. Not that often, he said. I thought he said it shiftily. Perhaps that was my imagination. Maybe just go and get a coffee or something. Wait it out, suggested my boyfriend. Well, there wasn't much else we could do. We left the estate agency and hung around hopefully at the flower stall next to Tooting Broadway tube station. But the road didn't look like it was going to be open any time soon. I asked the stallholder for the best place to get a coffee. I assumed there were dozens of choices. There's McDonald's, she said, or the market. I'd never felt like such a tourist in my own city. I was a bit ashamed of my vapid assumption that there would be a Café Rouge or Pret or Costa or Starbucks or Nero, that the place would be littered with friendly local cafes run by cheerful check-shirted owners, with daily specials written in coloured chalk on a board, and a selection of artisan muffins. We opted for the market. I was still hoping for that elusive, subversive charm. I wasn't disappointed. After a false first start in the smaller market, which was a bit grubby and unappealing, we came to Tooting Market, which was full of noise and life and colour. It's still my favourite part of Tooting. I was relieved, but rather dismayed that I'd managed to buy a house in a place which I knew nothing about.
So that was Rupa Faruqi talking about location in London. So you live in London, Marianne, right?
Yeah.
But not your whole life. So
Not
I'm
my
just
whole life.
I'm just interested. How do you feel? Has it shaped you as a writer in any way? Because you kind of moved around quite a lot. So I don't know if location is a big feature for you in what you write about and how you feel about the writing life.
When I was listening to that, I was thinking, I'm definitely not one of those writers who goes, oh, I'm from Yorkshire, it's in my blood, it informs everything I write. I think probably the location that informed my early writings, and for a really negative way, was Worthing, where I lived from 10 to 18.
Okay.
And it was basically a place that I just could not wait to escape from. One of the very bits of journalism I ever wrote was for, again, a magazine that doesn't exist anymore. It was Honey Magazine. And I wrote, they had this thing about write about your hometown. So I wrote about how boring it was. And I remember they put this picture up and it's just like a beach hut and shingle. And I wrote all about how, my best friend and I used to bunk off school and we'd sit on the beach with a bottle of cider because we had a really, there's nothing to do. And we're always wanting something to happen, like, I don't know, David Bowie or somebody to come land down. And that was my whole life, was always thinking, I want something to happen. But apparently there was a real stink in the local paper, which just says it all about Worthing, doesn't it? There was a big thing in the Worthing, I think it was the Gazette. The columnist of the day said I was a sad, twisted individual. The mayor actually offered to take me round to show me the opportunities that Worthing had for young people, which I obviously missed.
Because you're a sad, twisted individual. That's a badge of honour.
It is, especially from Worthing. I just feel thrilled to bits, yeah. So I guess that's how sort of location sort of informed it. And then my first play was all about growing up in Worthing and going to a really boring school and just being really bored shitless and wanting things to happen.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So moving to London and Rupa's little bit that we heard there, there was actually some real life crime in it. There'd been a stabbing in Tooting. And obviously you write about real life crime. And so I wonder if that has been how you relate to that, living in London. Obviously London's a big city. Like any big city, it has its fair share of crime. And one of the things that you have been looking at in your work is the depiction of that real life crime and how it's different for like local communities compared to how it's portrayed in the newspapers and the media. And I was wondering if London plays a part in that, because it's basically right on your doorstep is a really good source of material, surely.
Oh, gosh. Well, at the moment, I live in Zone 4, just outside Richmond. So it's about as quiet and as leafy. Okay. And that's something quite hard for me, because I was actually born in Notting Hill, and that sounds quite posh, but it really wasn't in those days. My dad owned he ran an off licence, I think, where there's now a very expensive shishi restaurant. And my dad used to, I think he was great friends with his armed robber who used to hang out at the Earl of Lonsdale round the corner. So for me, living in Zone 4, it's just like, oh my God, all this green, it's just too much. This is way out of my comfort zone. So what you say about, has London informed it? Again, I don't think it's so much location. I mean, you find crime everywhere, don't you? So I don't think it's that so much. You know what I think it is? I think it's just an intrigue with the dark side of human nature. That's what it is. Yeah. And being a lapsed Catholic and going to convent school and having that terrible, boring childhood. Yeah.
Well, I think, and just sort of following on from that, one of the things that you've been writing about, which I really want to dig into a little bit, is the idea of non-profit journalism and how these things are reporting things in local communities like crime in a different way from the sort of mainstream media. Do you want to talk, because that's basically the focus of your academic work, right, which I think is fascinating.
So basically, I started doing research for this book. It was about 8 years of research, but I published academic articles along the way. And what kind of changed the focus was I went to this conference at Goldsmiths on investigative journalism, and I heard about the work of the non-profits and how they were challenging all the accepted norms of crime journalism. For example, where communities, particularly communities where there's a high population of people of colour, were kind of getting a bad rap because local newspapers were closing down, journalists weren't part of their community, they were reporting on communities they didn't know anything about. They were trying to, as you say, do journalism in a different way. And so I got a contract to write a non-fiction book, so conscious moving away from pure academia, about crime journalism, how it had been, what the changes were. And I started writing it right at the start of the pandemic, and it was also right, I think in May 2020, the murder of George Floyd.
Right.
And all the repercussions from that. And I don't know if you remember or were aware, there was a big movement, obviously, in the States, less here, about defunding the police.
Yeah.
But there was also a movement towards defunding the crime beat. And that was really the impetus for what I wanted to write about, which was, what's crime journalism gone wrong? You know, what are the harms that are causing people, particular communities, and what are the non-profits getting right? So all through that pandemic, I got to know people on the Bureau Local, the Bristol Cable, the Bureau for Investigative Journalism, and I was really interested in the things they were saying, that basically they were talking about how crime journalism relies very heavily on the testimony of the police. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
And over the last 10 years, particularly on both sides of the Atlantic, and particularly in cases of shootings of people of colour, we have seen that police testimony can't always be trusted.
Yeah.
But also, because the police are the first source for journalists, and so the old way of working, you get a very police-centred idea of what crime is about.
Sure.
And what they were saying was, you know, what good is this doing anybody? Shouldn't we be looking more at the wider picture? Why are young people getting into knife crime? What are the societal aspects? What can we do to bring about change? Shouldn't journalism be a force for change? I also got involved in something called It's Criminal, which was a journalism meets theatre project, which was really, it was up in at Glasgow at the Tron. And it was sort of funded by City University and led by Glenda Cooper, who is herself, she's an academic, but also a journalist, and Robin Kwong, who used to work for Wall Street Journal. So very, you know, people with high profile. And their idea was to work with sort of some of the work that I had done and some of the findings that I'd come up with, and actually get people who'd experience of the criminal justice system to actually act out things in vignettes. So you could see there was one sort of little sketch which was worth more than, you know, my pages of dry old academic tome, where one woman is being interviewed by a journalist and talking about how she's fled her country seeking political asylum, she can't find work. And then the journalist goes back to her editor and says, here's my story. And the editor's like, no, this is not sexy enough. What's the sexy bit? Oh, she says there's more crime in Glasgow than Iran. That'll do. We'll have that. And it's that sort of thing. And it was really interesting how, we were preaching to the converted because it was very much an audience of people we knew. But it sparked huge interest and huge discussions. There's talks about trying to get more money to do this project in the future.
Following on from that, talking about the sort of technical thing, I mean, you are an academic, you're primarily writing in that, but you're obviously doing other non-academic
Yeah.
stuff as well. But I wonder how you feel about the task of promoting your work, because your academic writing, your academic work, is by necessity quite complicated and quite in-depth, right?
Yeah.
You can't just skirt over the surface of something. But then I guess you get invited onto podcasts or you get to festivals and events and have to talk about all this stuff to a layperson. Do you find that easy to do? Because you've already talked a little bit about trying to write as simply and cleanly as possible, and I guess
Yeah.
it's just an extension of that, maybe?
Yeah, I was quite terrified the first time I did it. And actually, the book launch for the last book, the one we've just been talking about, was actually organised through Writers' Mosaic.
Oh, yeah.
And because of that, and because there was a budget, I was able to invite Duncan Campbell on. And then I was like, oh my God, I'm at a book launch with Duncan Campbell. So I think I just wrote over and over again all these pages of how to sort of sound intelligent promoting my work. And I really wish I hadn't done it because I got so terrified of the whole thing. I then was sort of parroting out what I learned. So I think it's much easier to just talk quite simply and passionately about what you're doing. As an academic, though, you are expected to promote your work. So, yeah, you do sort of have to promote it on social media and try and make other people aware of it.
And how does it compare? I mean, do you do a lot of promotion within academia, like academic conferences or stuff like that? Are you always thinking about the audience, I guess, in terms of how you're pitching things?
I think as an academic, I've not wanted to just write for a very small academic audience. I felt that the stuff I'm writing, it sounds quite arrogant, but it has a sort of wider reach. Like, for example, the work about the non-profits.
Yeah.
I think it's something, not my work, but their work should be promoted. And certainly, when I was talking to academic colleagues, a lot of people in criminology just weren't aware of this, because for years and years and years, criminologists have been banging on about the harms that crime journalists do. So I was saying, well, there's this whole movement in the States here. They're actually doing this.
Yeah.
Isn't this really exciting? So basically, probably for the last couple of years, I've been talking at book festivals and podcasts and things like that because I've just wanted to talk about what's been going on and to promote their work, if anything else.
No, I love this idea of, because it's about, it's really important stuff about social justice, effectively. And you don't want it to just be, in the old classic, in a garret or whatever of academia. You want it to be, getting us out there as widely as possible. So do you have a plan of action?
So at the moment, I'm doing two things. Part of what I wanted to be, I wanted to apply to be an RLF fellow is I'm really passionate about teaching good writing. It's some of the stuff that I do work at Edinburgh University. And I found this really, really rewarding. And it also helps me think about, my craft and how I can simplify. I'm learning a lot from the students. But also, there's two things. I think it was almost because I felt I'd been out of that world for quite a while, the world of script writing or whatever. It was almost like being an RLF fellow gave me permission to sort of go, oh, it's okay now for me to try and branch out a bit more.
Okay.
So one of there's three sort of projects. There's possible doing more journalism / theatre on this It's Criminal thing. Mm-hmm. The thing that I'm nearly finishing at the moment is a book called Policing and the Media. And that's been something of an eye-opener because nobody's really written about this since the early 2000s. And it's been written from, shall we say, a white, male, middle-class perspective.
Sure.
And I, right from the first pages, I've been saying, what do you think of when you think of the police? Do you think of them as detectives, or do you think of them, as our enemies? Because for a large section of the population in this country, the police are not their friends. And I remember Colin Grant talking at one of the events I was talking at about how every night when he was coming home from the BBC, he was stopped by the police. Yeah. So I've been writing about crime drama, crime news and reality television and talking about the way the police have had this influence on the kinds of crime drama we see and whether these narratives are particularly helpful or not. And then there's a sort of passion project that I also want to do, which has nothing to do with crime and nothing to do that, but basically just going back to plain old writing play.
Okay. Wow. It's all really fascinating stuff, and especially the work. I mean, I was nodding away to everything you were saying there about perceptions of the police. I think it's something that really needs to be addressed. I think it's great that you're actually working in that area right now. Okay, so now it's time to head over to Anne Morgan with the latest Royal Literary Fund news.
2 novels by Royal Literary Fund Fellows are in contention for the 2025 Booker Prize. Andrew Miller's The Land in Winter, which recently won the Walter Scott Memorial Prize for Historical Fiction, and Jonathan Buckley's One Boat join 11 other novels on the long list, which also includes Love Forms by Writer's Mosaic contributor Claire Adams. The shortlist will be announced on the 23rd of September. A Royal Literary Fund Fellows award-winning adaptation of George Eliot's The Mill on the Floss is now available on Audible UK. Rhiannon Tice's BBC full-cast dramatisation, originally for Radio 4, runs to 10 episodes and stars Anna Maxwell Martin as George Eliot, alongside Joanna Vanderum. It won Best Radio Drama at the 2020 VLV Awards for Excellence in Broadcasting. A children's book exploring the wonders of the digestive system is among new works by Royal Literary Fund Fellows published this month. Dr. Rupa Faruqi's The Glorious Gut allows young readers to follow their food's journey. Published by Walker Books with pictures by Viola Wang, the title is part of Faruqi's new series on the human body. A Royal Literary Fund Fellows adaptation of Alterations by Michael Abensatz is now available to watch on National Theatre at Home. Directed by Lynette Linton, Trish Cook's version of the 1978 comedy brings the story of the beleaguered Walker Holt, a tailor given just 24 hours to fulfil his biggest ever order, to new audiences. For more information, visit ntathome.com. And finally, 9 RLF Fellows have been honoured by the Royal Society of Literature. Gillian Allnutt, Marina Benjamin, Sita Brahmachari, Lucy Ellman, Gwyneth Hughes, Sarah Lifanu, Lucasta Miller, Rachel Seifert and Rick Stroud are among 28 new Royal Society of Literature Fellows announced this year. And now back to the studio.
Thanks, Anne. I'm afraid we're out of time, Marianne, so all that's really left is for me to thank you, Marianne Colbran, and hope this has been as much fun for you as it has been for me.
Definitely, and I hope I haven't bored the pants off you by ranting on at you.
It's been absolutely terrific. Thank you so much for coming in. If any listeners out there have any comments or writing questions that you would like to hear RLF Fellows discuss in the future, please message us on social media. Thank you very much and goodbye.
You've been listening to Collected, the podcast about writing from the Royal Literary Fund. If you'd like to share any comments or questions, please use the hashtag RLFCollected on our social media channels. The music was composed by Andy Glenn. There was research by Nicola Baldwin and post-production by James Robertson. Our producer was Anne Morgan.